Hey, this is Kev with Blender Binge coming at you with another tutorial. This time we're going to be creating a cool sci-fi interior reminiscent of like the Borg. So it's going to be fun, it's going to be cool, and you're going to love it. Let's go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the cube. Cube, get it? Joke. Fun. And I'm going to start creating my environment. So to do that, I'm going to create a torus. So the first thing I'm going to do here is hit Shift A, or I can go up to the add over here. Either one, doesn't matter. And go to mesh, and go to torus. And then I'm going to set the properties of the torus. To do that, I'm going to go down here to add torus. I'm going to call up the properties panel by just clicking on it. And I'm going to enter some values. So I'll leave generate UVs on because I want that. Major segments, I'll put 48 is good. Minor segments, I'll say 24. And now I'll go down to major radius. And I think I'm going to put major radius at, let's see here. Let's scroll down a little bit. Maybe 0.58. That's pretty good. And then minor radius, I think I'll go up a little bit. Well, let's see. 0.5, that looks pretty good. And click off it. So now I have my environment, but it doesn't look much like an environment. It looks like a bagel or bagel or donut. So what I'll do is I'm going to select my camera. I'm going to hit Alt R to zero out the rotation, and then Alt G to clear the location. And if I hit this little arrow up here, or I hit N on the keyboard, it calls up my panel and shows me everything I want to see about the object I'm on. So now everything's zeroed out, and all I'll do is rotate this on the X 90 degrees up. I just go in here, type in 90, hit enter, and there. So now I have my camera and I have my environment. So what I'll do is I'll hit lock camera to view. Then I'll go in here and I'll hit 0 on the numeric keypad. And I'll use my scroll wheel to zoom back a little bit. And you can see we're inside the torus now. So what I'll do from this point is I'm going to scale down my torus. So I'm going to select the torus, and I'm going to go on Scale, Z, and I'm going to bring them down to about 0.36. That's probably pretty good, right there. And you can see that we're starting to get that environment look. So now what I'm going to do is smooth this out. So I can hit Control 3 on the keyboard. And what that does is it goes over and adds in a subdivision surface modifier. So if I go to modifiers here, you can see that I have now the subdivision surface. And the 3 that I just hit is the view. So I have view of 3. So it's subdividing it pretty nicely. And I could go and smooth it out a little bit more by just going to Object, Shade Smooth, and that takes away a little faceting, and it just looks smoother now. So see, I'm starting to get this environment. Now what I'll do is I'm going to go to Rendered over here, and that shows me what Eevee will see. So if I go over here to this little tab, you can see that Render Engine is Eevee, and I want to use that. So what I'll do now is I'm going to start getting the texture that's going to give me that really cool little like sci-fi look in here. So to do that, I'm going to use a program called Displacement, and I'll leave a link under the description in the first comment of this video, and that'll point to where you can get this program. So the program looks like this. When you download it and you install it on Windows, I don't know if there's a Mac version, but you'll get this. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this once. I'm going to go to Displacement 2, and then I'm just going to click in here once, and I get this texture that comes up. So I think I'll leave it as is. That looks pretty good. Maybe you can always go and change these like background iterations, and I think I'll change that, leave it as that. There we go. So that's something more along the lines of what I want. So I'm going to go and save that, and then I'm going to come back to the video. All right, so I went and saved that, and now what I'll do is I'll just hit this once more, and I'll go to jsplacement.grid, hit that, leave the defaults, hit this once, and I'll say save height, and I'll save this, and then I'll come back to the video again. All right, so I've gone ahead and saved that, and you can see here that I've called it dots02, and just make sure when you save this, you hit .png, because it doesn't save with the default extension. At least it's not doing it for me right now. So just add that in. Okay, so now back in Blender, I'm going to go ahead and use that texture to displace our geometry. So to do that, I'm going to make sure that I'm on the torus, add modifier, and displace. And we get that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to texture, I'm going to hit new, and I'm going to go to this little show texture tab. I'm going to hit open. I'm going to go to where I saved sci-fi, so I saved it at sci-fi 02 height. Okay, and you can see here that this is what I got out of JS Displace or JS Placement. Hit open image, and we get this, which is totally not what we want. So the first thing I'll do here is this is color space. I'm going to change that to non-color. You don't really have to, but we're working with a non-color image here, so I just get in the habit of doing that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, let me stretch this out a little for you. I'm going to go back up to displace, and I'm going to change the strength to 0.05. And there we go. So now I'm getting some displacement happening in this thing. And now we can turn up the view here a little bit. So 4, and then 5. And you can see here that we're getting a pretty nice looking displacement in here. So now I can change local to UV, UV map to UV map, and we have a pretty nice looking generic sci-fi texture on our object in here. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten this up a little bit. To do that, I'm going to go back over here to my texture. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to go to mapping. And I think repeats here, I'll say 16. And Y, I'll say 8. So X is 16, Y is 8. And I get this pretty interesting looking mess. So now what I can do is I'll go to camera. I'll go to camera over here, and I think I'm going to go focal length. I'll turn this from 50 down to about 24. And now I can zoom in a little bit more and maybe move this over a little bit. And now we're getting something a little more interesting looking. So what I'll do now is I'll get rid of the light because I don't need this light. Delete. And I'm going to go ahead and add in my own light. So I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to light, I'm going to say point, and I get that. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to move that behind. So on Y, I'm just going to push that a little bit behind this column that I have here, the middle of our torus. On the X, I can move them a little bit more behind. I'll take the power down to about 4. I can turn the radius up to make the light smoother, less harsh. And I could set the color to, say, like some kind of blue. So there we go. Now I can go ahead and start adding some texture in here. So to do that, I can either go to shading up here, or I can just go down here where my mouse turns to a little crosshair, click and drag up, change this right here to shader editor, click my torus, hit new, and now I have a new shader in here. And it just gave it the principled BSDF shader. So what I'll do now is I'll pause the video. I'm going to save my file so I don't lose it, and then I'll come back. Okay, so I saved that. So now let's turn on a few things inside of Eevee that's going to make this a little more palatable for us. So I'll go over here to Eevee, and I'm going to turn on, I'll turn on Bloom, because I'm here. I'll turn on Screen Space Reflections, and I'll turn on Volumetric. Shadows, I think I'll leave those where they're at for now. So now what I can do is I can go on our torus here, and I have my principled BSDF shader. I can make it metallic, and I can play with the roughness and start seeing what's going on. So, ooh, that's kind of cool. So we're starting to get a sci-fi kind of cool look to this. So now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play with the texture, the shader here, and I'm going to make this even better looking. So the first thing I want to do is I want to be able to add in some images here that are going to punch this out a little bit more. So there's a really cool plugin called Node Wrangler, and if you don't have it on, you can go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, go in here, type in Node, and make sure Node Wrangler is checked. What that lets you do is click on this principled BSDF shader, hit Control-T on the keyboard, and it wires it all up for you. So it just saves you a bunch of time. I really like this. So what I'll do is I'm going to load in that same texture that we had. I'm going to load it in here. So I'm going to go to Open. Oops, where's my sci-fi? Sci-fi 2 height. And now I have the texture on this image. And all I have to do is map, create the mapping. So repeat X 16, repeat Y 8. So X scale to 16, Y to 8, and now it's mapped onto the object. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these guys. I'm going to hit Shift D on the keyboard, drag it down, and I'm going to plug this color into roughness. And that's going to change the roughness. It's going to change, some parts are going to be like really reflective and other parts are not going to be reflective. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these guys over. And then we're going to add a color ramp in between here to control more of this. So to do that, I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Converter. I'm going to go to Color Ramp, and I'm going to drop it over the line. When it's on the line, if you drop it, it wires itself up. And now I can play with this, and I can make this way more contrasty. And if I go ahead and turn up the light, this point light, and let's say make this like 14 watts, we could see we're getting a little bit more. Let me turn down the saturation of this a little bit too. That's probably pretty cool right there for now. All right, select that again, and I'm back here on my material for my torus. So you can see as you move this, you're controlling the color of your shader. So I could go here and I can take this down a little bit, make it more gray, and so it's not so white. I could take this black color here, push it up a little bit more, maybe push it a little bit more into the blue, and you could start getting a little bit more interest in there. So now we're starting to get some of these highlights coming out and things popping a little bit more. So I'll leave it at that. And now same thing for roughness. I can go here, hit Shift D, bring that down, plug that in, and I'll just change this back to black and white. Black over here, white, and I can control the roughness. So white is completely rough, meaning that you're not going to get a mirror look, and black is pretty much reflective mirror. So you can play with that to your heart's content, push it up, push it down, and get something kind of interesting. So now what I'll do is I'll start adding in some lights. So to do that, I'm going to pull over my material output, and I'm going to create a mix shader in here with an emission, and then we're going to control it with that dots texture that we made inside of JS placement. This thing. So to do that, I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Shader, Mix Shader, drop that in. And then I'm going to go Shift A again, and I'm going to say Shader, I'm going to say Emission, pull that down here, plug that into the second port, and you see that I'm getting this factor. So factor 1 is total emission, factor 0 is no emission, 0.5 is right in the middle, but we don't want that. So we're going to control this with that other shader. So all we have to do is I'm going to select these three guys, hit Shift D to duplicate, pull that up. I'm going to change this sci-fi O2 texture here to the dots texture from before. And I'm going to plug that into factor. And now, if I play with my strength, you can see that I'm starting to get some lights showing up. And the hotter I go, the more lights show up. Now, you can also control this with a color ramp as well. So I'm just going to steal this black and white color ramp here, hit Shift D, pull that up over here. When it's over the line and the line lights up, if you drop it, you click there, it wires itself up. And now I can control how many lights are shown by just controlling this ramp. So it gives me a little more to play with. So now I think we're ready to do a test render. So I'm going to save it. Let's see, I'll go to the torus. I'm going to go to my displacement modifier. I'm going to go to my subdivision surface modifier, and it says render 2. I'm going to turn that up to like 6. And if you don't want to go too high, I find that I have a pretty powerful graphics card here, and if I go higher than like 7, the whole thing freezes. So I'll try 6 and do a test render. So I'm going to pause it and come back with the render. So here we have the rendered image, and you can see it's starting to come together. So we can probably get a little bit more detail out of this thing. So maybe I could go to render and I can hit 7. And I'll just leave it at that for now. And I think what I'll do is I'll pull out my camera a little bit further. So I'll go to my camera and I'll just zoom out a little bit more, pull this over, and there we have a little bit cooler of an environment. Or maybe, let's see, camera, I can push on the Y just a little bit more in, and there we're getting something a little bit better. So if I render now, we can test out and see what it does. All right, so we can see that barring a not very good lighting job right now, we're getting much more detail and a cooler look inside of our displacement. So what I'll do with this now is I'm going to play with the lighting. So I'll go to my point light and I'm going to play with the radius. And you can see that here you're starting to get some really crazy sharpness, and there we're starting to level it out a little bit more on the radius. And what I can do with this is on my light, I can go to shadow, I can hit this contact shadow, play with the distance a little bit, and just start playing around. Softness, I can go to EV and hit ambient occlusion, that'll just give it a little bit of bite. Go to shadows, I can change my shadow. So cube size, I can push up a little bit. You don't want to go too high. I can go high bit depth, soft shadows. And now I can play around with my radius a little bit more and just start bringing it in and getting a little more, just a little bit more of a bite to this whole thing. So now to give it some atmosphere, I'm going to add in a cube. So let me go here, turn off lock camera to view, go outside, and that's looking pretty interesting on its own. And I'm going to add a cube to my scene. So I'm going to go to Shift A or add, mesh, cube, and I'm going to shrink the cube down. So to do that, well, I'll just push it out of the bounds of this. It's too much. About there. And I can go to scale and I can pull that guy down to about there. And now I'll give him a new shader, get rid of principled BSDF, hit Shift A, go to shader, go to principled volume, plug the volume into volume, and now I get volume. So if I hit 0 now, you can see I'm getting some shading happening in here. And what I could do is I can play around with maybe a little bit of emission strength. Gives it some volume. Can give it some lighting. And we're getting some really nice environment lighting in here. And what I can also do is under volumetric, Right now I have tile size set to 8. The lower you go, the higher the resolution, but the longer it'll take to render. So I'll leave it about 4 is pretty good. And I can say volumetric shadows, and that'll also kind of throw off some shadows. So now I'm getting a bit of a better environment here. I can play with density a little bit, play with the color a little bit, and do a test render. So you can see here we're starting to really come together. So what I can do is I can darken this even a little bit more, play around a little bit more, and add a little more lighting, and we should start getting something that looks pretty cool. So if I go back to my torus, I can change the strength of these lights. So emission, I can put a little bit toward the green, push it up, start getting some glow in there. I can go to my color ramp here, maybe change that a little bit, and I can play around with my lighting in the back as well. So I can go to my light, my point light, and I can play around here. Let's see. If I go dark, it's a little bit dark. If I go hot, 25. I gotta find something in the middle there. Maybe 9. And I can add another light and put it in here and just throw a little bit more onto this thing. So what I'll do is I'll go to my point light, hit Shift D, and pull this guy over. And if I pull him out now, I can move this guy kind of over here, inside here. All right. Hit 0. I have a light now coming from here, and you can see it. And if I turn it up, it's really bright. I can change the color, maybe something a little more orange glow, and I'll turn it back down. It's like 15, nah, 7. Just want to throw a little bit of light on there. And I'll do a test render. Okay, so there we go, and we're starting to get a pretty interesting looking sci-fi thing. So now we just got to tighten up the lights just a bit more. And I'm going to pause the video and make some changes, and then I'll show you where we're at so you don't get totally bored and we can just roll with this and go with it. So I've gone ahead and made a few changes, just a little bit. I tightened up, I pulled this out a little bit, changed the strength on the emission a little bit, tightened up the color ramp on the roughness, just tweaked this a little bit, and we're getting something way cooler looking. And also what I did is I went into the cube and I added in a noise texture. So you can see here this noise texture and through a color ramp, and I was able to just break up. So if I go out of here, you can see it just breaks this up a little bit, and I gave it a bit darker color, took out the emission, gave it this eerie green color. And my lighting now, all right, I kept the primary light pretty much as is, all right, radius 0.64. And the second light I put out here, I just changed it to this, from orange to this kind of olive drab color, 0.64 again. And you can see that it's really just tightened up this whole look. So now if I hit render, you can see what it's going to look like. All right, so I went in a little bit further with the camera, and you can see here that it gives me this really kind of cool, tightened up, sci-fi interior looking kind of Borg-ish cube thingy. So all that's left now is I can animate this if I want and have it kind of spin around. And to do that, I just select the torus. I can go to rotation. I'm going to rotate, let's see, here's the Z. I'm going to rotate on the Z. So with torus selected, I can right click on here and I can say insert single keyframe at frame 1. I can change this to frame, let's see, 480. So I was at what, 250. I can change this to 480. I can go out here to the end, 481, and I can say 360 degrees, hit enter, right click, say insert, or say, let's see, insert single keyframe, and now I have it rotating. And if I go over here to, let me see, I have view set at 5. If I go over here to render 7, okay, turn on motion blur, that's fine. All right, I turned up cube size here to 2048 and cascade size to 1024. That's fine, fine, fine. So now if I want to render this out, I could just go to output. I can go to create a folder, sci-fi interior. I'm going to call it sci-fi interior dot, I mean for the sake of this, I'll do dot mp4, hit accept. You can change file format to FFmpeg video. Can go to encoding, hit that, just do H.264 in MP4, seems to be fine. All right, it's going to be an MPEG-4. And hit render. Right now I'm at HD. And then I just go render, render animation, so Control F12, or just go right there, and we render it. And I'll pause the video and come back when it's done. All right, so here we have the animation. You can see it's moving around, going pretty well. Looks a little staccato, and that's fine. So here's one that I took into post-production and just cleaned up a little bit just by rendering out EXR files and going in and just cleaning up a few things. And you can see that using Eevee and running it through post-production, you can get a pretty decent look, and it's not too difficult to do. So hopefully you got something out of this video. If you did, hit like, subscribe, share it, hit that little bell notification, and I'll just keep making more. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.